on and off over the last few years. So it's good to see them touching on this sort of energy and net zero topic for their Village Halls Week 2022, which is really exciting. I suspect you've probably heard quite a lot about climate and environmental topics over the last few months, particularly because we hosted COP20 this year. So I hope that's given you, I hope in many ways that you're sort of better informed about what this is all about. But essentially in 2015, the Paris Agreement was signed, and that committed signatories to keeping global warming to a maximum of 2 degrees and hopefully no more than 1.5 degrees. So if that sounds challenging, then it really is. But bear in mind, we're already living in a plus 0.9 plus 1 degree climate change scenario. So our climate has already warmed by about plus 1 degree centigrade over the long-term index that's used for that temperature series. So we are already facing global warming and climate change, as you well know. And the impacts of this are being seen around the planet, and the extreme weather is being more frequently attributed to climate change and global warming. So you can see that this is a pretty serious topic, and I'm sure many of you understand this already. And then, of course, in I think 2019, the UK government published its Net Zero 2050 policy, which responds directly to the Paris Agreement in terms of those temperatures I just spoke about. And the UK was the first major economy to commit legally to reducing, decarbonising to meet the Paris Agreement. So the UK really has stuck its head very far above the parapet and has made some very, very strong commitments to decarbonising our economy. And that goes from the smallest household to the biggest business. Net Zero 2050 is a policy document, talks about all aspects of UK PLC, all aspects of society, all sectors of business and industry, and requires business as usual to be firmly grabbed, shaken around and dealt with. So, I mean, that very much applies to village halls and how parish and town councils operate as well. So really, I mean, my first piece of homework for you is to grab the executive summary for Net Zero 2050, which can be found on the Climate Change Committee's website, and have a read. It's a very useful document, and it will certainly get if you don't already know about this topic, it will certainly get you to a good place very quickly. So that's the executive summary of Net Zero 2050. And once you've had a look at that, I think you'll get the gist of what this is all about. So what I'm going to do, Angela's asked me to talk specifically about energy audits, and I can show you an example of an energy audit. It's something I've done informally for a number of years, and I did it as a favour to the Elam Village Hall Association, primarily because I used to live at Elam. And I did this a few years ago, but it has kind of helped them, and I can give you an update on that. But it's an old document, it's from 2014, but the principles still hold. And if you wanted to do an energy audit of your village hall or any other buildings or activities that you undertake, it's probably a decent sort of reference point for you. So I can talk you through that. I can give you an update on what Elam Village Hall did next in terms of their deployment of solar photovoltaics. And then I think I'll probably stop talking and then invite you to ask questions, because it's probably better that I try and answer some of your immediate questions. So I'll probably spend 10 or 15 minutes talking about those documents and what Elam Village Hall has done, and then we can open it up to a more general sort of discussion and hopefully help answer some questions that you'll have. So I'm going to share your screen, my screen quickly, and start with the document, which hopefully you can see on screen now. Is that okay, Angela? Is that a thumbs up? Thanks, Philip. So as you can see, this dates from May 2014. The brief really was just to, well, there was no brief actually. I mean, I think the village hall had a few problems with a couple of their energy systems. And also they were sort of concerned about the cost of running the hall, which I think is probably a very, very common problem for all of you. But if you think the cost of energy was high in 2014, well, you know that it's eye-wateringly high now. And some of you may already be experiencing some pretty significant hikes in your energy costs. Anyway, Elam were thinking about this in 2014, and this is what I did for them. So let me show you the contents, which is always a useful place to start. So you can see here, I did a site overview. So I described what I did a survey, basically, looked around the building with one of the committee members, had a good look around. So I described the site. I was given some data on the energy usage, which was mainly in the form of paper bills, so gas and electricity. So I grabbed data from the bills, and that sort of information is very descriptive and very quantitative, and actually helps you enormously in terms of what happened in the past and what might happen in the future. I looked at the tariffs they were paying, what tariffs for gas and electricity they had. I looked at the raw consumption. I looked at operating costs for these systems, and I attempted to sort of benchmark the village hall against sort of industry averages, if you like, just to try and get a feel for whether the consumption was average, high or low. Then I did a summary of what I saw. So I described all of the main services that are in the building services, looked at heating and hot water, lighting, also considered windows and doors in terms of their draft proofing and insulation. I discussed, considered ventilation. Some halls have mechanical ventilation and some have no ventilation whatsoever, apart from opening the front door when it's being used. I looked at any electrical device that might have been in the hall. For example, kitchens, commercial kitchens can be quite high areas of electricity and gas consumption. And I looked at some of the controls, thermostats and switches, switch gear, and bits and pieces that are monitoring and helping the committee sort of manage what's going on. In most halls, these are very, very simple, and literally it's a switch saying on or off. So, not particularly advanced in most cases. And I also thought about the supplier for energy and what renewable energy was or wasn't being used at the time. Then I looked at a set of recommendations. The village hall very bravely went with a ground source heat pump very early on. This probably goes back to something like 2000 and, gosh, I think it might have been 2008, 2009. So even at that point in this story, Elam Village Hall Committee were very interested in renewable energy. And no, actually, it goes back older, because this was a millennium project. So the hall dates from about 1999, 2000. So I think the heat pump was installed originally. There was a change to its specification due to budget, as you probably anticipate. But yes, they were a very early adopter of heat pump technology. I looked at the heating system in general and made some recommendations about those other points there. So what does this actually look like? So basic introduction, a quick overview of the site. This is a ground floor of nearly 600 square meters. So quite big, I think. It's quite a modern, large village hall. I've recently been to Graveney Village Hall, which dates from, well, probably the 1950s, maybe the 1960s, and it's pretty small by comparison. So yes, this is probably quite a large village hall. Talked about the historical energy uses, the tariff, and I tried to sort of graph and plot exactly what was happening in terms of how much their rates of electricity units were costing them. It's just remember, the total cost you pay is one aspect, but it's the pence per unit that's really, really important, because that's actually what the energy is costing you. So often, if you can grab that data and plot it, it's very descriptive, and it just helps you understand which direction you're going in terms of costs. At the moment, these graphs will look, if you look at the left-hand y-axis, they started at 10 and 11 pence. I wouldn't be surprised if these were breaching 20p now, and probably due to go up to sort of 25 or maybe higher. So you can see that, you know, Elam probably is facing at least doubling in energy costs today. I spoke a little bit about VAT rates, because sometimes VAT can be zero rated. And also, I think the CCL charge, the climate change levy, can also be waived if you meet certain conditions. And if you look at the government website for VAT on energy and CCL on energy, it'll tell you what the rules are. And I think it basically depends on whether you charge access fees for the hall, whether you're actually charging for the use. So it's not straightforward, it's not complicated, but it's not totally simple either. So have a look, and it could be that maybe VAT and CCL may not be applicable to you, but you have to look at the rules. Again, I looked at raw consumption. You know, this is just the kilowatt hours being used, and I sort of drew this slightly complicated graph to try and understand which direction consumption was going in. Now, of course, energy consumption is very seasonal, high for 6 months when it's cold, and low for 6 months when it's warm. So you get this incredible seasonality with consumption. But as you can see, the trend lines were generally pointing downwards, which is kind of what you want to see when you're analysing consumption. Then you can turn consumption into costs. And then I did a bit of benchmarking, as I described. So then I moved on to talk about what's actually what energy systems, you know, what systems are in the building that are using energy. So pretty standard bullet point sort of stuff. Lighting is obviously can often be a very big user of electricity, particularly if you're not using LEDs. So Elam Village Hall had quite a lot of GU10 halogen lamps at that time. So I don't know whether they've replaced these, but they had 20 35 watt lamps in one room on its own. So if you think, well, 10 times 35 is 3,500 kilowatts. So 20 is about 7,000 kilowatts. So that's kind of the equivalent of 2 or 3 kettles on all of the time, boiling away all of the time. So quite a big energy hit just for one room if you're using halogen lamps. So that's a quick win, that one. And of course, fluorescent tubes, you know, really now need to be replaced with LED lighting and luminaires. So LED luminaires are basically what you need to be installing now. If you have PIR, which is proximity infrared, these are the sensors that detect movement and can obviously be used to turn off lights that aren't being used automatically. And as you know, something very strange happens to human beings when they're not in their own homes. I mean, I work in a co-working office in Canterbury, and people just leave the lights on in meeting rooms every single time. And it's just, I don't know what happens to humans, but they sort of panic and say, well, the light was on when I went into the meeting room, so I'll leave it on after I finish. So, you know, humans behave in ways that are not optimal for the environment, as you well know. So lighting is an easy one that you can fix. Windows and doors, you know, draft proofing. I mean, essentially poorly fitting windows and doors that aren't insulated or draft proof properly. Yeah, they make buildings feel very uncomfortable. Whether or not they'll have a big impact on raw consumption is to be determined. But essentially, anybody who's tried to do something in a cold, drafty, you know, in a building with old windows and doors knows that can be quite an uncomfortable experience. So if you've got people who are using the hall and it's got old windows and doors, then often that can be a good thing to do. Insulation as well. I mean, you know, some village halls, you know, have fairly inaccessible loft spaces if they have one. I mean, Elam Village Hall is a very, very high ceiling, and I can only assume that the building was insulated properly when it was constructed. But Graveney Village Hall, for example, has got a tiny little loft hatch at one end of the main space, and goodness knows what's up there, and you'll only really know once you can access it, and that can incur a health and safety risk. So insulating lofts can be quite difficult in village halls, but well worth doing if you can, and so on and so forth. I mean, look at this one, but that Ealing Village Hall had 4 fridges. I mean, this is crazy, really. I mean, ideally, you want to kind of consolidate your refrigeration and reduce it down as much as possible. And you should really try and avoid deep freezing wherever possible, because that really does use quite a lot of energy. And so on and so forth. You get the gist. I also looked at renewable energy to see what was happening there. So they didn't have any renewable electricity, but they did have renewable heat. And unfortunately, Village Hall didn't, I don't believe they had their heat pump accredited under the RHI, the Renewable Heat Incentive, which is now, both of these have now finished. There is no more government subsidy for generating renewable heat or power, which is I think is probably fine, because the government spent 10 years subsidising these things and have a legacy of payments for the next 15 years. I think the feed-in tariff was a 25-year commitment. So the government did support these things very well for a decade, and it's come to an end, and that's probably right. The next thing is in April, there's going to be a £5,000 voucher grant towards renewable heat equipment, but I don't know whether that'll be available for village halls. So more information needed on the April grant that's forthcoming. So there you go, a quick summary of what I saw, and then I looked at the recommendations. So basically the heat pump was causing a few problems, the heating system in general, and there was probably some recommendations around controls, timer programmer and thermostats. Funnily enough, it looks like there was a halogen bulb quite near to the thermostat, which might have been causing some strange readings, and so on and so forth. Checking pump speeds, checking maintenance, making sure that preventative maintenance and servicing was taking place to keep things optimized, checking that pumps weren't circulating unnecessarily. A lot of heating pumps are just on 24/7, whereas actually modern pumps are variable speed and can actually have quite a big impact on quite a big impact on electricity costs. Lighting, I spoke a bit about that earlier, about upgrading, and management as well. How trying to control how people's behavior, and actually having a policy around energy management, turning the lights off, checking bills regularly, making sure you're not existing on estimated bills, and actually reading meters properly and recording your meter readings, that kind of stuff. Looking at the supplier, talking about insulation and draft proofing. And then we got to section 3.8, and I said, consider a solar PV project. And I'm very glad to say that Ealing Village Hall did install a solar panel array. I think they did that in around 2014, early 2015. So that was so what I can do is just now tell you a little bit about the solar project. So can you see this? I've switched documents. Can you see this new document? Thank you. So essentially, I literally did this on Monday. So between 2015 and 2021, Ealing has had a fairly large, well, it's a 23 kilowatt peak system on the east-facing roof of the Village Hall. The Village Hall is oriented, the main spine of the roof is oriented to the north-south. Therefore, they've got an large east and west facing roof surfaces. At Ealing, they are on the west side of Ealing Valley. And of course, the right-hand side of the valley is kind of, they're slightly down in a dip, but the sun pops up quite nicely from, from one side of the, if you had your back to the Village Hall looking east, the sun pops up in the east and rises up, and it transits across the roof very nicely, and it's unshaded. So as you can see in that first graph, they've had a very something happened in 2021. There was a spike, and I know that June 2021 was quite sunny, but it could have been a data issue as well. But you can see that the generation has been fairly consistent over that 7-year period. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year period, and the red dotted line shows you what the average is. Can you see that okay? And then total generation by year, I mean, they're actually generating sort of, the maximum was nearly 28,000 kilowatt hours of energy, slightly down in 2021. But you can see that, a substantial amount of energy is being generated from the roof of this building. I think this is probably similar to the total, this is probably higher than what the building actually needs, but bearing in mind that I can't remember the total consumption, so don't take that as truth, but I think this was contributing, at 26,000 kilowatt hours a year. The solar was contributing a very significant amount of the total electricity needed. But bear in mind that obviously the hall isn't always being used when generation is happening. So the actual, the total generation versus demand might have been very, very high, like say 70 or 80%, but the actual internal use of that clean electricity might have been a lot lower, maybe 35, 40%, because the hall is not occupied all of the time. And there are some times of the week and some times of the day when there's just nothing happening, but the sun is shining. So you can see that total generation does not equal total consumption. But this is a grid connected array. So any surplus would either be used for hot water heating, or it would be pushed out onto the grid for income via the feed-in tariff. So you can see that while the Elam Village Hall made a very good use of the feed-in tariff when it was available. So either way, it's a good story. So the total yield is a ratio. Yield is basically the number of units generated per kilowatt peak. So the array was 23 kilowatt peak. So if you divide the generation by the monthly generation by the total kilowatt peak, it gives you the yield. And you can see that actually the yield is very good. It's over 1,000 kilowatt hours per kilowatt peak in every year. And most solar proposals that I see estimate 900 to 950 kilowatt hour per kilowatt peak. So you can see that this array has actually outperformed the expectations by about 19%. And in my experience, that's very common. Installers, when they're making proposals, are reasonably conservative about generation. And often, once an array has been installed and it's been operating for a while, the generation actually outperforms expectations. Doesn't always happen, but I think experienced installers are actually quite good at managing expectations and not promising the world. But as you can see, this is a pretty useful result for Elam. Now, if we convert the above, obviously every kilowatt hour, you can attract carbon, you can create a carbon footprint. So current government factor for electricity is 0.212 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilowatt hour. So if you multiply the total generation by that factor and divide it by 1,000, you come up with tons of CO2e equivalent. And as you can see, this array is producing, avoiding 5 tons at least of carbon dioxide equivalent every year. So far it's avoided nearly 38 or 39 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Now, of course, this is avoided because basically this is avoided carbon, not a true carbon offset, but I'll come back to that. But essentially, Elam has not grabbed this much carbon from the grid. It has avoided emitting this amount of carbon. Now, this is slightly different to a carbon offset. This is called avoided emissions, avoided carbon emissions. But I believe that I think it is acceptable for Elam Village Hall to basically, if Elam Village Hall did its carbon footprint, and let's say the carbon footprint was 20, they could legitimately say that they've avoided a quarter of that by just from their solar array. I don't know what Elam's carbon footprint is because they haven't done it yet. But bear in mind that CALC, the Kent Association for Local Councils, has just made available a scope 1 to 3 carbon footprinting tool, which I prepared for them. So it's just been launched by CALC and made available to all parish and town, all members of CALC. So that's parish and town councils. So Elam could now pick up that tool for free, do their scope 1 to 3 carbon footprint, understand what their total emissions are, and then they could consider what impact the solar array has had on their carbon footprint. I don't know the results. It could be that Elam has kind of accidentally become a very lean, low carbon organisation by installing this solar array. I don't know the results, so I couldn't comment any further, but it would be an interesting exercise. And if Elam needs some help with that, I can certainly provide that help. And similarly, I can support via my work with CALC, I can support people who want to use that carbon footprinting tool as well. So I think this is quite an this is, you know, right up to date. It's current, based on actual data. This isn't a guess, it's using the official government carbon factor for electricity. So I think this is quite a nice point to have got to for this particular building. And as you look at the estimated value of this electricity that's being generated, when I looked at this in 2014, I think the pre-project estimates were about 11.1 pence per unit for electricity. So basically the solar, therefore, if we multiply the units generated by that value, you can see that the solar array at Elam is basically generating about a benefit of the value of the electricity generated by the solar is nearly £3,000 a year. And the maximum is obviously in June, or often it's June, July when you get the best solar performance, but it's an average of 242 a month, or for the whole year, or 375 between April and September when you get the most solar generated, the most solar electricity generated. So far, this array has generated around about £20,000 worth of free, clean electricity. So the simple payback is approximately 12 years. But I think it's better than that because I haven't got the feed-in tariff income for Elam. So once you've factored in the feed-in tariff subsidy from the government, the payback is highly likely to be less than 10 years and probably down to maybe 8 or 7 years. Again, I don't have that data, so I can't check. But that's a pretty good result, £20,000 so far. But if we actually updated those prices to what they're experiencing now, I think they're on 19.7 pence. So it's getting on for doubling over that period of time. So the average is actually 5,000 a year and a total of 35,000. So again, the simple payback on that basis at today's prices is actually about 6 years, and that still hasn't included the feed-in tariff income. So you can actually see that as the cost benefit of these bits of technology improves massively when you're working in an environment of high energy costs, which of course we are at the moment. So the solar PV panels are still pretty much the same as they were 6-7 years ago, maybe slightly better. So that's not much has changed there, but what has changed is the cost of grid gas and grid electricity. So the economics of solar PV have improved significantly since this project was done. So I hope that gives you, a sort of a quick flavour of what's happened at Elam. as I say, it's an interesting context because it was a millennium project, so the building is actually quite modern. So they were starting, you could argue that they were starting from a relatively good position. And I'm very aware that there's a whole, the age of buildings around the county used as village halls, it varies enormously, and some are going to be pretty old. So I hope that's given you a general intro into what an energy audit might look like. And if, and there was a case study there of a recommendation that was actually implemented by the village hall. I think in terms of cost of the project, I think they had several checkbooks were opened and some nice checks were written by local people. And also an organisation locally gave them an interest-free loan. So there is a loan that the hall is paying back. So that I have not factored those into that basic economic analysis I showed you. So there is a loan associated with this, but it was 0% and not troubling for the association. So I hope that gives you a good intro. So I think really, I mean, we're 10 past 11. I suppose what we could do, Angela and Kirsty, is maybe open up the session and just start taking questions and see what ideas, what concerns, what opportunities people think there are with their village halls. I mean, has anybody else installed solar PV on their village hall, and what impact has it had? I think Philip's got a question.
Yes, I'm an interloper actually, because I'm from Pagham Village Hall, which is on the edge of Bognor Regis in West Sussex.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, welcome.
Still very welcome. Yeah.
Thank you. And our hall sounds a bit like the one you've just described at Ealing, because it's built in 1998, sort of on the general shape of a Sussex barn, if you can imagine what that looks like. And it's got a very high main hall that's sort of based on a badminton court. So it sounds very similar to what you've got at Ealing.
Ealing's got badminton courts in it as well, so it's got a very, very high ceiling.
That's it, yeah, very high ceiling. Pain to get up to the top of it. You have to wheel in a cherry picker. We had an array of 87 solar panels fitted on the roof in, I think it was 2019. And I wrote in our annual report last year that in our second full year of operation, we spent £1,060 on our purchase of electricity, which was a saving of 1,716 compared with our base year. And we received feed-in tariff of £2,000 and
wow.
£2,025.
Amazing.
In effect, our electricity cost is less than zero. So we're quite pleased with how the electricity has gone. Of course, and we're trying to think what we should do to take that on, because one thing is a bit like how you described at Ealing, probably more than half of the energy electricity we generate from those solar panels, especially in the summer, goes back into the grid. We don't use it. We've been looking, but our main cost, of course, is gas, because we have a gas boiler which heats the building. We haven't got heat pump, and we've been sort of trying to find out whether we should, what we should do to reduce the carbon footprint more, and ideally reduce our gas consumption. One thing we've been looking at is reverse cycle heat pumps, air source heat pumps, which, as I understand it, can generate heating in the winter and air conditioning in the summer. We've got a sort of figure of £35,000 to £40,000 to go down that route. Another route which has been suggested for us is to fit up a big tank in the loft with an immersion heater in it and use the energy which we generate from the solar panels to heat water, which can then be pumped around the building. And we've sort of got a figure of around 10,000 for that. But we're finding it very difficult to find any advice? Where can you find people who can advise on what the best solution might be, and then advise where you can find someone who's going to install it?
Well, that's a good question. I think air source heat pumps are basically what you're talking about, Philip, is what's called the electrification of heat, which is what Net Zero 2050 is calling for. And that's simple things such as not using gas hobs in kitchens, to not connecting new buildings to the gas main. But in a retrofit context, yes, air source heat pumps are important. And I suppose really, gas-based central heating is very much, it's a boiler. Sometimes they can be quite big. It's pipe work, it's radiators, it's a pretty, a whole building thing. And sometimes I go into buildings and you sort of think, well, is this actually valid anymore? I mean, you have to sort of really think about what you've got and how the building is occupied and how much it's used, and then consider really what the best option is going to be. For example, I was talking to a wildlife trust in Birmingham who are building a fancy new kind of visitor centre, and they want it to be ultra green. So therefore they were thinking about a fairly expensive heat pump system. And it was sort of, 30, 40, 50, it was a lot of money. And I sort of thought, well, look, it might be very current and top of the pops and all that kind of stuff. But do you actually need it? Do you need that technology? And do you need to spend that much money? Could you, for example, use high efficiency storage heaters and do away with wet central heating altogether? It's far cheaper. It does cost, it's based on electricity. It's not a renewable energy, but it's very controllable, very easy to maintain, and generally speaking, a pretty simple option. So if you do have a preschool or a club or a society or something going in intermittently, I mean, why install a really significant piece of renewable energy that's going to cost a lot of money and incur a lot of operating costs and a lot of high capex, high opex? Why do that when you don't actually need it? And I'd hate to say that, put a jumper on and make do, but sometimes I really do think that we could actually consider the counterfactual more intensively and say, well, we could spend 30, 40, 50,000 pounds on that heat pump technology, but we could actually do something completely different. And this is what Net Zero 2050 says. It says, look at business as usual, smash it apart, and don't make the same mistakes again. In a modern building like the one you described, Philip, it could be that a heat pump's actually a very good option, but that's not going to be true for all buildings. Heat pumps work best in relatively modern and well-insulated buildings at the moment, because they are low temperatures. At the moment, they are low temperature systems. But it's not going to be suitable for everyone everywhere. And frankly, you might not need to spend that much money. So where do you get the help from? Well, building services engineers are traditionally heating engineers and electricians. So really, it's the same old, it's old-fashioned advice, but get 3 quotes. Invite good quality companies with local reputations and good local reputations that they want to maintain. And by the time you've spoken to 2, 3, or 4 installers, you should start hearing, what you're aiming to do is to hear, what you want to hear is consistency. If you only get 1 quote or 2 quotes, you can have 2 contrasting approaches and you'll never know which the right one is. But by the time you've spoken to 3 or 4, you should start to hear consistency in what these experienced people are saying. So that would be my number 1 recommendation, really, is to speak to as many good quality installers that you can. I always advocate using local companies with good reputations and reputations that they want to keep. try and avoid speaking to a company. You're based in Sussex, the worst thing really you could do is get someone coming down from, somewhere else in the country who's going to have to travel a long way. They might install it well, but trying to get them back in to deal with problems or servicing might become a problem. So it's well worth scoping out your local supply chain, understand what's available, try and understand what other similar organizations, whether they've had good experiences with technologies, bad experiences. Just do some due diligence and speak to people with knowledgeable people. You can speak to someone like me, and I'm going to give you some independent, someone like me who's a CIBSE accredited person, for example, Chartered Institute of Building Services Engineers, low carbon consultants, that kind of thing. They'll come and look around and give you sort of unbiased, impartial, independent advice on what your opportunities are and what the priorities might be. So you could also talk to someone like me, but equally you're going to get, by the time you've spoken to 3 or 4 good installers, you're going to get that's where you're going to get your consistency of advice from, and that will take a bit of time. But I think my key point is, don't spend 30, 40, 50,000 pounds on a technology you might not actually need. Keep it simple. Village halls tend to be run by volunteers, very good volunteers, but often they're not specialists. Some might be, but often they're not. And sometimes people just don't have enough time to give these things the attention they need, particularly if they're not working properly. They can become a headache. So I think that's the worst case scenario. Best case scenario is you invest in a technology like that and it works beautifully, and it should do. But I think make sure you're aware of your options first and don't install something that's complicated that you don't actually need. I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, thank you.
So that's good. So it sounds like this Philips organisation has another really good example of how solar PV has helped them. They've dealt with electricity well, decarbonised it extremely well, and now their problem is to do with heat. And heat is often much more complicated than electricity, so it is often the most difficult one to tackle.
Okay, so we've got some more questions in the chat, Matt. So I'm just looking.
To have a look.
Do you want to have a look? Or I can read them out for you. So, Lynn is saying they get lots of calls from people offering to do energy audits, and they're always concerned they're scams. So is there a way of accessing a bona fide company? There's some kind of listing, or where would you look? Is it the organisation that you mentioned that you're a member of that would be a good place to contact if you wanted an energy audit done?
Yeah, I think CIBSE is potentially a good place to start. There is a register of consultants on CIBSE's website. Again, I think understanding your local installer base is probably one of the best things you can do. Talk to them. Mm-hmm. And when you look at these installers' websites, whether it's solar or heat pump, you might find what I tend to find is you get companies either specialize in one technology, solar, heat pumps, for example, or you get a company that is kind of has specialized in several technologies. I mean, in Kent, the number of companies that can install multiple different types of renewable energy technologies I could probably count on one hand. They are fairly rare companies. So often you find one business that specializes in solar, one that specializes in heat pumps, and so on. Mm-hmm. Check your supply chain, do some due diligence, do some research, understand who's installing what and where they are. Look at their websites, look at the case studies, have conversations with them, invite them to do surveys, invite them to put proposals to you. That is the best way to open up this topic.
Mm-hmm. So is companies offering you know, different technologies who are offering to do these energy audits then? Is that, do you think that's what these calls are?
An energy audit,
aren't they?
yeah, an energy audit is sort of, it sort of describes what I showed you effectively. But I sort of suspect that there aren't really many people doing that type of audit. Probably doing is, most people probably want to sell you something and install something for you. Part of that process, there will be a sort of an informal audit. But I think the discipline of doing an energy audit is what I just showed you, that example from Elam. So every village hall could undertake an exercise that looked like the exercise I showed you. They could do that themselves, and once it's written up and you know, it's summarized, some conclusions and recommendations are made, you could probably do your own energy audit.
I do have a template for that actually, so if anybody's interested in having a go themselves, I suppose it's what you do with it once you've done all your, you know, checking your energy use and so on, and you know, what do you do next, I suppose, isn't it? Deciding what to do with it really is that step that maybe, you know, people don't feel they have the knowledge to take that next step and actually make decisions based on the audit.
Yeah, I mean, I think companies are often, I mean, someone says here, we get lots of calls from people offering to do energy audits. Can anybody give me an example? Who is calling you and what are they offering to do? What type of company?
So this was Lynn. I don't know if you want to press your space bar, Lynn, and just jump in.
Yes, they usually say they're representing the government or some big company, and it throws up red flags to me.
And what are they actually to you, Lynn?
Well, they don't go into specifics because I don't stay on the phone for very long. They usually say that they're quite pushy, and it's very difficult. You can't just say no. They then push and push and push, and usually I just have to say, look, I'm sorry, I've got no time, and hang up. So, but it would be good to know how should we go to a consultant first before looking at installers, or because installers seem to me to have a vested interest in one particular, or maybe one particular way of saving energy.
Well, I think it's important. Lynn, you might need to use it's a bit echoey. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's important that I showed you the process I went through with Elam, and essentially that dealt with the issue that you just described. So they basically, with my help, they basically did their own energy audit, and it basically, well, first of all, what did they do? Well, if someone phoned you up, Lynn, and said, can I do an energy audit? You say, no, thank you. We've just completed our own audit. So that kind of closes that down, doesn't it? And I agree with you, you know, why are they phoning you up? Yes, they probably want to sell you something. They probably want to switch your energy. That. So yeah, I think any village hall association could undertake its own energy audit. You've seen what I did. It's not that difficult. You could seek help from people. You could go to a consultant if you wanted to. I mean, one of the parish councils has contacted me this week asking for an energy audit. So they've asked me to put a price together. I mean, I can't, please don't phone me up asking me to put a price together. I can't do many of these simultaneously, and I'm really busy at the moment, but I'll probably look to help. I think it's Stone Parish Council, maybe from April, something like that. But do it for yourself, self-serve. Basically, look at what you're doing, write it down, analyze your consumption and costs, and try and see, you know, depending on what objective you've got, is your objective reducing cost, which is going to be very difficult at the moment? Is it about reducing consumption and therefore carbon? Is it about making things work properly? Is it about making the hall more comfortable to be in? Is it all of those? Is it something else? Do you particularly want a piece of renewable energy technology? what's your objective? You know, so doing the energy audit will describe the context and the history, and then you can actually move on to your conclusions and recommendations once you know what your objective is. So as I just said, what is your objective? That's a good question.
Can I just jump in, Matt? And I know you're, as you say, you're not available to do lots of these audits, unfortunately, although I'm sure you would, you could be kept very busy with village halls asking for them. But we've just had a question saying, could you give a very ballpark figure of what you'd expect to pay for a professional energy audit? And I guess also, are there many people doing them? I suppose, again, it's, you know, it's coming back to finding someone to do it if you don't feel you've got the confidence to do it yourself.
Well, I charge about 450 a day, and that's not, I can achieve higher day rates with some of my corporate customers. So that's not, you know, I can achieve higher income from other places, if you see what I mean. So to do the Elam audit, I think I probably spent a couple of days on that, but possibly a bit more. By the time I wrote a presentation, it was more than a couple of days, because I did the audit, did the analysis, wrote the report, then we did a tender document for the solar, then I helped analyse the tenders, then I did a presentation to the committee. And then I helped with ad hoc questions. So I probably did, at least 3 days, I should think, for Elam, over quite an extended period of time. But I did that for free because I lived there, and you know, it was the best thing to do, and it was useful for me at the time.
Yeah. So I think Jerry's question was, he's in Lyminge, which you'll know is just down the road, a much smaller hall, and he's had an estimate of 2,500 for
2,500 for 2 days sounds far too expensive to me. I don't know the scope, I don't know who they are, but the day rate sounds far too high for that kind of work.
Okay, thanks for that. So again, we've got that, again, somebody asking for ballpark figures. So I think you've given us a daily rate, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm, you know, I have applied less expensive rates to calc projects in the past, for example, and charities. You know, I have reduced my day rate a bit for charities, so there is some flexibility there. But the fact is, you know, with Stone Parish Council, for example, I think they've got multiple buildings. It's a distance for me to travel, so I've always got to consider that if I, you know, take a day out to go to Stone, then, you know, ideally I'm losing a day that I could be working for someone else. So I've got to do this on a commercial basis or very close to it. Otherwise, I've missed out somewhere else. But I would suggest a day rate in the region of a low of maybe 300 and a high of maybe 500 or 475 is probably what you should expect, something like that. It depends on the person's experience and on their qualifications and their accreditations. But £2,500 for 2 days is I would suggest that's probably too high.
Yeah, and so what should people be looking for, just to summarise on the accreditation? What would you hope to see on that, just so people know they're getting someone who does know what they're talking about?
Well, I think not all experienced people have fancy accreditation, so I think experience is the most important thing. So try and find out who they are, what they've done that's relevant, and how often they've done it and how recently they've done it. I mean, someone like me who's been working in environmental and sustainability topics for energy efficiency topics and renewable energy for a decent amount, 10, 15, 20 years, is probably going to be a fairly safe bet. So you need to understand who you're talking to, basically. What makes them suitable for what you need them to do. And it could be that you've got an experienced person on your committee. I know that there lots of very experienced business people who exist on village hall committees, and it could be that between one or a few of people, you may have enough experience to do a decent job yourselves. It's not complicated. You've got to look at your consumption, the cost, understand what systems are being used, and make draw sensible conclusions and recommendations about what you've looked at. It's a sensible process. The worst thing you can do is try to discuss it free-form in a committee meeting, because it's just going to go nowhere, because you'll just get one side opposing the other, and someone will get unhappy about something. You know, really you want to do a sort of a fact-based bit of work first, get everybody to read it and check it, and make sure everybody's happy with the conclusions and recommendations that are being drawn. That's probably the best thing to do. And that doesn't need to be very complicated, and it doesn't need to be very expensive. But if you do need help, SIBS is probably a good place to start for a properly accredited person. And you might find a useful person locally who's, you know, someone who's worked for, I don't know, someone who has an energy background. You know, that could be a young or an old person, it doesn't really matter, but, you know, someone who understands what they're looking for, basically.
I think I'll start compiling a list for village halls. We do have a sort of networking thing, so I can just ask, you know, who's used an energy consultant, who would they recommend? So that would be, you know, I think quite helpful for people by the sounds of it.
And the template you mentioned, Angela, is that
yeah?
Template, or
that's from the Centre for Sustainable Energy.
Okay, CSE, yeah, CSE, a very Bristol-based charity. CSE's often got a lot of very useful information. I believe they do have staff. You can ask CSE to help with that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, that's right.
The network of this type of experience used to be much better about 10 years ago. It's not so good now, but yeah, CSE is an option. I mean, I would be happy if you wanted to show people my template or my document, Angela, maybe just the contents, or, well, yeah. To be honest, I'd be happy if you provided that to people. I mean, it's pretty standard stuff. You can see what needs to be done, and that is my gift to you all.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful, actually, because I think it's one thing seeing a template, and it's another thing actually populating it, isn't it? And just so people can see. And as you say, a lot of it is really common sense, like having the 4 fridges all running and empty. I mean, that kind of thing. There's a lot of sort of smaller stuff you can just do quite easily. I mean, I think that perhaps quite a lot of halls, perhaps we've got a visitor, perhaps quite a lot of halls have already sort of, you know, they've perhaps done the easy things, and they're looking to, you know, now they're looking at, you know, what next, and particularly with rising energy prices.
The appearance of the cat at this point means food, basically. So this will keep on happening.
Okay, so have we got any other questions? Is the cat named Carbon?
No, it's called Squirrel, and it's because she's very good at climbing trees.
Right. So
yeah, so I think just bear in mind that the template, that my document, I did that for free in my spare time, you know, just to help out. So, you know, but it's perhaps not as detailed as it might be, but I think it's certainly, it was a modern village hall, so it wasn't a particularly complicated building to work with, and it had a very big roof that was ideal for solar, so it was almost a no-brainer, really.
I mean, Angela, Steve's got his hand up there.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, I mean, actually, as you say, because, you know, for the older halls, the ones that are sort of 100 years or years old, probably a lot of it is around, you know, replacing the windows and you know, those sorts of things, rather than looking at anything more complicated, or the renewables. I mean, it really is, it's about insulation and you know, better windows and doors, really.
Yeah, that's right. Anybody else?
Yeah, there's Steve
Renewable
Willis.
Energy.
Yeah, would like to ask you a question, Matt.
Okay.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you for allowing me on this. I'm actually based in Oxfordshire, Little Milton Village Hall, on their committee. So thank you very much, Matt. I found it very interesting and useful. Our hall was built in 2008. It's a fairly modern structure. It's a pine village hall. We don't have any gas at all. So it's all electricity, and we've been looking at our prices recently, but we've been considering what we can do, and actually listening to what you've said, I wonder actually if we're trying to do too much, because we've been looking at solar. Of course, we're not all the time. And I guess the question is almost answering in itself as I'm talking to you. Do you think going through something like with the capital expenditure of solar for a village hall is really something we should be doing, or should we really look at the sort of issues you're talking about? I mean, we have 2008 storage heaters fitted, for instance, and I didn't realise that there are high efficiency storage heaters that we could put in place and things like that. So I guess to answer my own question, the first thing we've got to do is that basic survey, isn't it, before we take the step on solar?
Yeah.
And then I guess the next stage to that is, if we decide to go to solar, are there grants or are there companies that would help us put those in that system in place, or is it something we've got to finance totally ourselves?
Well, let me answer that one first. I mean, no, there are no grants anymore. I mean, the government spent 10 years subsidising renewable heat and renewable electricity, and it's coming to an end. So unfortunately not, but I would suggest that the business case is probably stronger than ever, because the cost of electricity is so high now and the cost of gas is so high. So there's probably never been a better time to undertake an energy audit and to actually prepare your organisations for what's going to happen next. I mean, I think we're expecting big price rises in April, and they may remain high for a while longer. And the geopolitical conditions at the moment are quite troubling, and you know what impact that might have on gas supplies, for example, as well. So no, there's no support at the moment. But as a charity, are you a charity still, Steve? I assume you are. I mean, you're probably Ealing.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, Ealing Village Hall was absolute. I fell off my chair when they told me how much money they'd raised in such a. You are all brilliant fundraisers, and I know you can get the money together for this sort of stuff. So I think use your fundraising skills to good effect and see what you can achieve. I suspect that you can do a lot. There's this grant coming out in April, £5,000. I don't know the precise details of what that's going to include or exclude at the moment. And in terms of what you do next, I mean, if you feel free to contact me, Steve, and we'll have a chat, and I can look at a satellite image of the hall and maybe give you some tips. But I'm very keen on decarbonising heat, so I'm quite keen that people consider very carefully how they can. Did you say you're on gas or off gas?
Off gas, I think.
We don't have any gas in the village at all.
Oh, so you've got an oil boiler?
We don't have it. No,
It's
all electricity. It's all electricity at the hall.
Well, fantastic. So you've got no fossil fuel for heating at all, which is brilliant. No. I mean, if everybody was like you, that would be great. So really,
electricity costs are quite high at the moment.
Well, they are. Of course they are. And that's why Elam's done so well, because they've offset their electricity costs so well. So they're still a big user of electricity, don't get me wrong. And there's energy efficiency there are efficiencies that can be made with their raw consumption. But what they've done is offset that in that grid consumption with solar, and they've done it extremely well. So I dare say that if you've got a decent building with a decent roof, kind of pointing either 30 degrees of due either way of due south or east west, or any orientation for that matter, preferably not due north.
The roof actually is a cone.
Okay, well,
So we've got 4 sides to it, I guess.
Yeah, so yeah, great. I mean, it's possible, and I think the trick here, Steve, is to probably engage with some really good local installers. I suspect Oxford's quite well served for solar.
Yeah.
Pick, 2, 3 really good local installers, invite them around for a survey, and start getting them to put proposals together for you. And then, the solar proposals are generally, they're usually pretty detailed. So you'll get a very quick summary of what your investment decision needs to be very quickly. So I think book some surveyors, Steve, get them in the diary and invite them over.
Thank you very much. That was really helpful. Thank you.
Could I just add one point that I do know in Kent, the county council does have a scheme where they're subsidising solar panels. So it might be just worth checking with your county council and see if there's anything similar.
Okay, thank you.
Kent's got, it's called Solar Together, which is a sort of group purchase thing. I think it's mainly for domestic, but there might be a community version. I don't know.
Well, I had understood it was available for community buildings, but I may be wrong about that, but worth checking anyway.
Thank you.
Okay. Philip's iPad has got his hand up. Philip, do you want to unmute?
Philip, you're looking very indeterminate.
Yeah.
Is your camera need a bit of a...
Unfortunately, it's an iPad and it has a crack on it, so it's got a sheet of Tablon over the top of it. So that's why I'm a bit fuzzy. But I've saved money by not putting a new screen on.
Okay.
I hope you can see something.
I'm an interloper. A general impression of you through the lens.
I'm an interloper from Northumberland, so we don't get as much sun as you. And our village hall is in a small village. We're only 100 properties, and it is over 150 years old, being a converted old school. And it's not really a question because we are progressing, putting solar panels and a heat pump in this summer. And just on the form of grants, we're being hopefully major funded by the National Lottery. And anybody who's looking into it, it's worthwhile contacting them. Our project is going to cost in the region of £70,000, but includes excavation of a car park, which is halfway up the village hall wall at the moment. But on the electric side, we have no gas, no nothing. We're purely electric, and we're hoping to put in a 40-panel array in our car park. We can't use
as a ground-mounted array.
Ground-mounted array. We can't use the roof because the roof is south-facing. Would be ideal, but we're in a conservation area, and we're not allowed to do it. But on electricity costs, our current contract expires at the end of February, and I've been looking into new costs, and the cheapest we can find at the moment is nowhere near 24p, it's 29p. We are hoping that we will be able to generate about £3,000 worth of electricity, and we're wanting to use the heat pumps to provide a low-level heat all year, all winter, because as a small village, the hall isn't used much, but it's virtually impossible to use in the winter because with 2-foot thick solid stone walls, it just gets cold and never gets hot. And it's to provide a low-level heat. Would that be a feasible solution to you?
Well, I mean, it sounds very interesting. I mean, I think with older buildings that are hard to heat, and particularly, sometimes people like to trickle in heat in older buildings for conservation reasons.
Yes, we do.
So if there's a conservation objective to be met, then trickling heat in at a low level is often quite useful. I mean, you don't want to overheat old buildings because things start to sort of dry out and move and what have you. Is it going out underfloor or just from radiators?
No, we can't go underfloor. It's not practical. We're on granite, and cutting into granite is horrendously expensive.
So this is are these air source?
We're planning to do air source into a radiator-based system
Air to
along
water.
one side to provide low level, and keep the electric heaters on the other side to boost when people use it. It's only used a couple of 2-3 times a week at most, you see.
I mean, I mean, you know, I understand the concept. I mean, you know, I go back to what I said at the beginning or near the beginning is, you know, air to water heat pump. So what's it going to do? So it's going to provide renewable heat at a ratio of about 3 to 1.
Yeah.
You know, or 2.5 to 1. 2.2. Let's say 3 units of heat for 1 unit of electricity. But it's, you know, it could be, it's still going to use electricity, so it will increase. Basically, it's going to increase your electricity costs.
Yeah.
And you're also using storage heaters as well.
No, they're panel heaters.
What do you mean, infrared panel heaters?
No, wall convector electric heaters.
Oh, convectors. Okay. I wonder, Philip, whether a modern high efficiency storage heater would be your alternative project.
Thank you.
It's a possibility, and you might want to maybe, what would you do next? Well, you would probably engage an electrical, any electrical contractor will be able to install.
We've had our 3 quotes for heat pumps now, and none of them have suggested putting high efficiency storage heaters in.
They wouldn't, because they want to sell you a heat pump. I mean, your alternative project is probably not installing a heat pump and probably looking at storage heaters instead. There would be a much cheaper technology, much easier to install. There's no wet central, there's no water in pipes. It's as a simple response, Philip, it sounds like a good project, but I think if you probably may need to, one option might be to consider the alternative, which would be just going for, you know, high efficiency storage heaters instead.
Yeah. Thanks very much.
That would be a cheaper project.
Well, hopefully it's all going to be paid for by other people.
Yeah.
50% by the lottery, and local charities, we've now applied for the funding from them, and wind farms are very helpful as well. Another 20,000 from 2 local wind farms.
Well, that's fantastic.
Can I just ask Philip, sorry, go on Matt, what were you going to say?
Well, just to conclude, well, it sounds like cost is a minor concern.
It is, yes.
So that's great. So in that sense, then the only other factor is your ongoing electricity cost, which will increase with a heat pump.
Yeah.
Can I just ask Philip, you mentioned National Lottery funding. Do you know which stream of the National Lottery, which programme that was funded by? Was it the Heritage?
No.
Was it the community?
It was the community. It was the community one.
Right.
It's different for us than anywhere else. A couple of years ago, Northumberland became a trial for a different lottery funding system, and so we actually started applying in May last year. It's gone through 3 procedures before getting passed by the local lottery,
right.
And it's now gone just 2 weeks ago down to the National Lottery for rubber stamping. Okay. And we'll get the final approval by the 18th of February.
Okay.
And that's for over £31,000.
Fantastic.
But ask your local people who to apply for in the lottery.
Yeah, so I was just wondering then, because you mentioned your hall is, you know, an older building.
It is.
So I didn't know. Yeah, I mean that's encouraging that it's from the Communities Fund and not the Heritage Fund, because that means that kind of funding might be available to many other village halls as well. Great, thank you.
We also have in Northumberland. It's called Community Action Northumberland, which is a charity, but it's run by basically the county council, and it provides all sorts of advice to community halls, and it's them that have helped us. Possibly where you are, there is a similar sort of organisation.
That's actually us.
I thought
we're
it would be.
the hosts of this talk, yeah. So we're Action with Communities in Rural Kent for short, and we certainly can provide, you know, help and advice with finding funding.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a few minutes left, and I've got to move on. So let's get those questions rolling in.
Can I ask you about battery storage with solar panels and whether that's likely to be, you know, something that's at all viable?
Well, it's a sort of the holy grail, really, Angela. I mean, you know, not only can you sort of become energy efficient, you can then, you know, you can do things here, then you can install technologies such as the ones we've been discussing, and then you can try and store energy. You know, battery storage is a great thing to do, and effectively with a solar array generating oodles of power, that clean power that you're not using, then you can store it and reduce your reliance on grid electricity even further. So really it's the holy grail, but you can use batteries without solar. You can just import and export from the grid as you see fit, but that really relies on a fully functioning energy market, which isn't the case at the moment. You wouldn't really do that at the moment, but I would suggest that if you're going to do solar, the bolt-on technology for solar is battery storage. Essentially, store as much as you can that you're generating and use it when you need it, and the systems, the control systems will enable you to do that. There are some quite fancy systems like My Energy, for example. So MyEnergy, My Energy, uses a hub, a computer hub for buildings that actually integrates all of your generating sources and cleverly optimizes everything with the objective of actually using the least amount of grid electricity that you possibly can. And then that does actually include things like electric vehicle charging as well. You can generate oodles of solar energy on a Saturday and a Sunday when the hall, you know, on a Sunday or a Monday when the hall's not being used, then you can store it and somebody can partially charge their electric vehicle with it. So yeah, it's the next step beyond solar, really, and it's a very good technology, but still quite rare in this country.
Okay, thank you. So any other questions for Matt? No?
Sally, Russell, Simon, Anne, we've not heard from. Surely you must have one question each about your village hall, something that's been nagging you and bothering you for years. Well, they might all be great already, who knows?
I was going to say that we do have information on this thing about VAT on fuel, on energy, which I think you did just touch on that in the audit. I think if you're using a very small amount, you can get the reduced rate of VAT, 5%, I believe. But
well, I mean, we can, unless there's other questions coming through, Angela, I think I can probably leave it there. But I would ask a question to you all. Do you know the impact of the price increases that are just about to happen? I mean, I think in energy terms, what are you paying now? Is it fixed? Is it variable? If it's fixed, is it about to end soon? And if so, what's going to happen next? Because if you haven't looked at that yet, then you might be in for a nasty surprise. And I think Philip mentioned, or someone mentioned, that their price is going from 24 to 29.
No, ours is currently 16, and it will go up to a minimum of 29.
16 to 29. That's a huge increase.
Yeah, I think that's what we're seeing across the country. Actually, that's the feedback from, you know, all the different counties. That, I mean, we were very fortunate at Elam that our contract just ended and we were able to renew, so we didn't have such an increase. But now, you know, they're looking at sort of, you know, 50-100% increases. So
the price of energy has tripled since 2020. So, you know, I think my parting words are, there has never been a better time to do an energy audit. You know, if you haven't already done one, there's never been a better time to do one. And you might say, well, what can we actually do? We have no control over our energy costs. Well, yes, that's right. At the moment, the energy market is malfunctioning. What's happening is unprecedented. But, you know, there's never been a better time to look at how you use energy. And obviously, with climate change, global warming, the climate emergency, removing fossil gas, grid gas, or LPG or oil is really your #1 priority in carbon terms. Electrifying heat is probably a #1 objective for you all. So if you consider those facts, you know, that is what Net Zero 2050 is saying. Stop using fossil fuels as quickly as possible, or reduce use as significantly as possible, and electrify heat. And generate your own if possible, but you're not going to know what to do next until you do an energy audit. And I hope today I've given you a little bit of a basic framework into which you can actually undertake that activity now. I hope it's been helpful.
We did. Do we have one last question? I don't know if it's very, very quick.
Jodie says Nottinghamshire and some of our halls are doubling, even tripling. Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just Nottinghamshire, it's actually the whole of Europe at the moment is facing this problem. Yeah, there has never been a better time to reduce your consumption of grid energy sources. And if you fundraise well, and if your buildings are suitable, then I would argue that solar panels on the roof, if that's possible, heat pumps, or something quite radically different, such as storage heaters, are probably 3 things to consider quite carefully. But also look at your lighting. Are you using halogen bulbs, for example? So some quite easy things to think about.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much, Matt, for that. There's lots and lots to think about there. We are recording, as you know, and we'll send out the recording, and I can also circulate some of the resources that we've got at Rural Kent. So the energy template, energy audit template, and just put it in. If there's anything else you would like that I've mentioned, just put it in the chat, and I can add that to the resources that we send around. So thank you very much. I think, as we said, we've got our next talk on crowdfunding at 12:15. That is it is sort of focused more on Kent. So of course you're very welcome to stay, those who are not from Kent, but and you may well have something similar happening in your own county. Yeah, so you're welcome to stay or not. Okay. So thank you so much again, Matt, for joining us, and I'm sure we'll see you again.
Well, it's a pleasure, and good luck to those who are. Philip's project sounds great. Good luck to that chap in Oxford who's looking at solar, and so on and so forth. And if anybody wants to phone me or email me, then please feel free.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Take care, everybody. Okay. See you soon.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. To tell you much more about it obviously than I know, but it does offer this quite a different kind of option for village halls to raise money for things like you know, renewables, or sort of, you know, bigger projects to improve the carbon footprint of their building. I think it's not something that village halls perhaps have considered that much. You know, they tend to be doing the more traditional fundraising type things, you know, the coffee mornings and the, you know, the sort of you know, events and things like that. So it's an interesting one. I think oh, sorry, I think you know, I think it's a really interesting possibility for halls, particularly as there is this match funding available from Kent County Council and some other organisations. So so I'm going to hand over to Kathryn now. I think can you screen share, Kathryn, or do I need to give you permission still?
Let me just have a go now and see if I can get my slides showing. Hello, everybody. Lovely to meet you. Let me just see if the technology works first. Yep, no, that's looking good. Let me just set this up very briefly. Thank you. to share. So hopefully you can see something there. I'm just going to go into slideshow mode. Get some, looking here, move this up the way. This over here. Sorry, just doing some housekeeping. And there we go. So hopefully everybody can hear me okay. So thank you so much for having me along today as part of Village Halls Week. My name is Kathryn Holland and I work for Spacehive. So Spacehive is an online platform for crowdfunding local projects, and we are working in partnership with Kent County Council on the Crowdfund Kent programme. Now, I understand that your focus today is on how village halls might be able to be run and maintained in a more sustainable way, and crowdfunding is one way that you might be able to raise some funds towards making some of those changes. So what I've done is I've put together just a few slides to give you a brief overview of crowdfunding and what that on Spacehive and what that entails. Some information about the specific funding available as part of Crowdfund Kent, a little bit on the eligibility, the kind of people that can apply, a couple of example projects and information on the funding timeline, and also just about how we can help you and how we can perhaps get in contact, and perhaps you can spread the message throughout your communities if you think that, oh, this could work for another group or another village hall or anything like that. And I'm very, very happy to answer any questions, again, either after this session or again, I'll make sure that the slides are shared with you afterwards and also my contact details. So anything like that, you can just contact me and ask me a little bit later. But just to get started, so Spacehive, www.spacehive.com, it's a website and it's an online platform for funding local projects. So you're probably aware of crowdfunding. So this is where lots of people pledge small amounts of money to causes that they believe in and they support, and it helps them to hit a larger target. So Spacehive is exclusively for community projects. So these are projects which are set up by the community and for the benefit of the community. And we work across the UK with local authorities and other funding partners to help you to pitch into additional funds to help you reach your fundraising goal. So there's lots of different programs around the UK, but today I'm focusing on the Kent area and the programs that we've got there. So the focus here on village halls, because I know this is what we're all here for today, but we also have all kinds of projects crowdfunding on Spacehive, so things like community gardens, public art, festivals, street parties, projects for mental health, for physical health, exercise, all these different kinds of things. So please do feel free to ask about any types of projects that you have. But for today, I'm going to try and focus a little bit more on those kind of community halls and those community spaces. But just to clarify, what would make your project suitable for Spacehive? First of all, it needs to be a project, as these would be perfectly eligible anyway, but for in a civic or a community space. So something that is accessible by lots of people. We can't be having any people sort of crowdfunding for sort of events in their sort of front room or private parties. It also needs to be a deliverable project in its own right. So it's not just about general running costs or non-specific charitable giving. So of course, lots of projects will involve some kind of running costs in them, but if you were just kind of wanted to pay your rent for a year or just generally collecting funds, this wouldn't be a suitable platform for that. And then the third thing just to note is that projects can be temporary or permanent. So of course, if you're getting works done to a hall or getting solar panels or something like that, then that would be a permanent addition, which is great. But also we are eligible for things like pop-ups, or even if you're trialing out an idea and something that might not last forever, you're welcome to come and sort of test out those ideas and see how they work with us as well. So now I'm trying to imagine the types of things or alterations that you might be looking to fund. And I've just started again, just off the top of my head, things like solar panels, heat pumps, installation. I'm sure there's a lot more things that you've been covering already this morning and probably to cover already, but that's just a few sort of key, easy things for me to list down there. And I've got an example of a project now that actually hit their target this month on Spacehive, just a couple of weeks ago. And I think that starting with a project example is sometimes an easier way to sort of grasp how it all works. I will go into a bit more of the detail of probably what I'm talking about a little bit in a few moments, but I just thought let's start with an example so you can kind of see what could perhaps work for you. So this is a community group in Fulham in London, so not quite as rural, but they managed to fund some solar panels for their Rosaline Hall. It was a really lovely project, and they actually only needed just over £21,000 to hit their target, but in the end they overfunded, and you can see there that they raised nearly £27,000 in total. And I will, after this, I will share a link to the page. I won't do it now because I'm not very good at multitasking, but so you can sort of look at the page in real time and sort of like click through and see this is only like the top part of the page there. But what they did is they ran the campaign over 3 months, and they had a really lovely campaign. They did bits of fundraising offline, online. They used the platform. They sent lots of updates. And you'll see actually just on the right-hand side there, that's the part that I've added from another part of the page that shows, it's just a little sample. And again, it's probably quite small on your screens, so I will make sure you can look at it more carefully later. It shows the kind of examples of all these small pots of money or larger pots of money that might come together to hit your target. So there are people that pledged small amounts of, say, £2, £5, £10, but then there was also support from the local authority in this case, which was the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, and they pledged a large £9,500. So that's a really sizable amount of money to go in to help them with their total target. But then they also had some local businesses, sort of local movers and shakers, individuals and people that either had some money to give them, again, small amounts, and it kind of all comes together, and they were sharing when there was a big pledge, they would celebrate that, and they might share a photograph, and it's just about bringing people along on the journey with you. And the reason that I've used this project as an example here is because they actually, if you do go onto their website later, you'll see that they described the project in a really clear way and listed out the benefits. So for example, what they were saying is right, so the solar panel installation, it will ensure that we reduce our carbon footprint, we promote sustainable energy consumption, and we'll make savings on our energy bills, those kind of things. So they're making really clearly this is what's going to happen. And then they sort of started to list a little bit more of the environmental benefits as well, which is about sort of like projected energy generation and carbon savings and all those kind of things. And then they carried on to the more social benefits. And this is what's really important to include when you're creating projects on Spacehive. It's about, so what are the good things? We'll do some community training. We want to save money. We want to bring people together. And it's just, they were really good at just putting sort of 3 bullet points for each thing, and just saying this, it's not just listing what you want, it's about why you think it's a good idea and really getting people excited. So I just zoomed into the breakdown of their costs. So this is just something that's handy to know. So if you were crowdfunding on Spacehive, you do need to cost up your project in advance, so you know exactly how much money you need. So you'll see they've got reasonably, like, it's a rough, but it's an itemized list. So you can see that it's a transparent process and people can see exactly where their money is going. So you can see they've got the capital costs there, they've got the roof works, they've got the engineer project management, scaffolding, all those bits and pieces that they've done the work beforehand to think, how much is this going to cost us? What do we need? I just wanted to say here that we do recommend that you cost up the bare minimum that you need to deliver the project in the first place. So when you're first doing it, think of what, in order to do something for the community, how much do we need? And then what you can do is you can add overfunding on. So then you can obviously, if you've got additional parts that you need, with the example here is that they wanted to also do some lovely community engagement workshops, things about sustainable energy consumption and all those, but they wouldn't, if they didn't go ahead, it wouldn't mean that the whole project couldn't go ahead. So it's about separating what's absolutely needed and what would be a nice to have on top, because that means that you can kind of focus on the urgent bits first, and then the rest comes a little bit later. And then moving on to, again, I've just included a couple of examples here of the examples of the pledges coming in. So you'll see you've got some large chunks of money coming from the London Borough. You've got Travis Perkins pledged, and then you've got somebody sort of a local, Jessica, who just pledged £5, and then they've got all businesses that they went to. So it's just about showing that mix of things from £50 to £5 to thousands of pounds, all come together and all make up that target. And then I've just got some more examples there, lots of 10s, lots of 20s, and it's about that combination of everybody putting in whatever they can, be that a couple of pounds or be that more, and it helps you to hit your goal. And again, just showing a couple of the pictures from their gallery there, just to confirm that it wasn't all done online. So you can see these are some pictures that they've sort of been uploading, either to give them updates or just to show previous work that they've done. But you can absolutely combine this with more traditional fundraising drives as well. So if you went and did some bucket shaking or some events or did a pub quiz, we can then, so Spacehive, although it's a website, it's run by human beings and people that can help you. So if you've got, say you've got a check from somebody, or you've managed to get lots of coins and you want to be able to show that on your crowdfunding page, you can absolutely do that. You just get in contact with us and then we'll be able to advise you the best way to do that. So don't say, obviously the campaign will be online, so that it's very important that you can access the internet and you can set that up and get something. Again, we can help you with that process as well. We do lots of training, and we can maybe sometimes pair you up with people that are particularly good, sort of good on the internet and good for things like that. But it doesn't have to all happen online. You can do bits and as you usually would, and then feed them all into one place. So then on to the actual funding itself in Kent. So our funding programme is called Crowdfund Kent, and we actually launched it last year, and we have run 2 rounds so far. It's been going really well. I've seen some amazing projects. Yeah, and it's really lovely seeing those funds sort of going on, and the whole process. We're building a real kind of cohort of people that sort of support each other. Projects seem to jump across and help to promote each other or share tips and tricks. So yeah, it's been a really lovely project to work on. In terms of the funding available, so it's the full pot is £500,000, and this covers all of Kent. And what you can do, so if you're a village hall, you can pitch for up to £20,000 towards your crowdfunding target. But what that is, it's a maximum of 50% of your target. Again, I'm aware that this can all feel a bit wordy at the moment, so I was sort of happy to sort of go through it with you on a sort of a case-by-case basis if you were thinking of taking this route. But what that means is that it's not exactly match funding, just to be clear there. It just means the maximum amount you could get wouldn't be more than half of what you need. So, and again, the pledge that you'll be awarded, that's all dependent on 2 things. The first is how much community support you have. So that will be showing how many pledges you're showing on your page at the time of assessment. And then the second thing is about how well your project meets the fund criteria, which I will show you just on the next slide in a moment. But just in general, as you can just see the wording there, this fund was created to recognise, well, it's the incredible community response like after the past few years. Kind of this, we're building back after COVID and how we're supporting our communities to keep going, and those community resources and all those really important things to help us sort of get back up and out there again. And I'm just going to, oh, actually, no, it's actually one thing I wanted to note here. We are aware that there is a village and community hall grant scheme as well. Now, these are grants of up to £30,000, which are available from the council. Now, that isn't a scheme that's run through Spacehive. That is a separate thing. So again, I'm not an expert to be able to talk about that funding in particular, but what I wanted to just note at this stage was that if you were to receive that, or if you were working on applying for those funds, you can absolutely, if you needed more than the £30,000 they would award, you can absolutely come to us to crowdfund for any top-ups or to sort of combine with other funds. So if you've got that, please do just contact us, and again we can discuss if we can help you with any bits there. But I just wanted to note that because I know that's really relevant to this area. So just on to, I know as I was talking about that eligibility criteria for those funds in Kent specifically. So they've got 3 objectives. The first one, which is about delivering community activities in Kent, which again fits in really nicely with village halls and those kind of community spaces very easily, because that's exactly what they're there to do. The second one, likewise, which is probably the most obvious, is like supporting community assets and venues. That's exactly what a village hall is. And then the third one is about helping to maintain the volunteering offer and social action. And of course, there's lots of volunteering that goes on to make village halls what they are. So it fits in terms of thematically. There's a bit more detail. And again, Spacehive are here to help you sort of join the dots between what do we want to do and how can we word that in a way that shows that our overall goals are helping the community. And then just a little bit more about sort of like who and what they can fund. I know this is something that always comes up, and the most important parts there, again, we'll be sharing these lists with you afterwards, so don't worry too much about all the words, but basically the fund can only pledge to projects that are delivered by a constituted organisation, so that might be a community group, a CIC, social enterprise, or registered charity. And what I wanted to say here is that if you are a parish council, you can't directly be a project delivery manager, but what we do is that we recommend that you work with a local community group or a charity or CIC, one of those, because usually as a parish council that you'll have connections with different groups that can kind of spearhead the project. And again, any questions about that, we're aware that parish councils sort of lead on a lot of village halls, and we're always very happy to sort of work with you in that, yeah, deciding what you need to do. But in terms of like just the name that you would put on your Spacehive page to receive the funds, it would need to be a different organisation. But again, we can help you with that. That's just to make sure that you're aware. Just to let you know now, so if you've been listening to some of this and thinking, oh, actually this really works for me, keen to get funding as quickly as possible, so our next deadline is actually on the 20th of April, and that's for projects that would want to be crowdfunding in the spring, so say that would be April, May, June roughly, and then that means you'd have raised your funds so you can start spending them in the summer and beyond. There are always 2 rounds a year, so the next round after that will be, we'll have a deadline, again not exactly confirmed, but it's usually around mid-September, and then that would be for projects that would be crowdfunding in those autumn months, and then getting the funds in their bank account usually by December, just before Christmas, so you can start spending it then. So it works on those 2 rounds a year for you to sort of get yourself organised with. So that's just worth bearing in mind. Then again, it will hopefully carry on into 2023 and beyond. I also just wanted to note that for any projects or for any halls that are based in Folkestone and Hythe or Dover, we have some additional funding available from Veolia's Sustainability Fund, which again matches really nicely with the themes of the things that we're talking today with sustainability and sort of like energy consumption. That's just up to £1,000 per project, but it's a nice little booster of something that you can very easily tap into and hopefully get that loaded onto your project as well. We do have lots of new pots of funding that are loaded on a regular basis, and again, once you start creating your project page, you'll start to be matched with those funds. So again, just get in contact and we can tell you what else is in the pipeline and what else we can direct you to, but those are the main ones at the moment, but hopefully we're hoping to see some more very soon. I'm just keeping an eye on time. Okay, yep, not going too badly. So just a little bit more, I've sort of done that zoom in on the funding available in Kent. And now this is a little bit more about generally sort of what kind of things we'll see on Spacehive. So on average, a crowdfunding campaign lasts around 10 weeks. But again, it all depends on how much money you're trying to raise. So it's completely flexible. And what we do is we look at how much money you're trying to raise, and we'll usually help you to like calculate, is this going to be a 2-month campaign, a 3-month campaign? The idea is that they are sort of short and sharp and quite a focused session. You don't want something stretching on for months and months because you lose a little bit of momentum there. And then that next thing is about a £10,000, or so we've got 10,000, it's usually 10 to 20,000, I would say, is our average project size. Again, we've had some huge projects of sort of hundreds of thousands of pounds, which is very exciting and wonderful to see that coming together. With those kind of projects, what you need to remember there is that it's not just relying on those small amounts from the crowd. If you've got a lot of money to raise, you will have needed to start applying for other grants or other large pots of money. So it's we just need to be realistic in how much you can raise. But sort of a nice, easy, round project of around that sort of 10 to 20k is kind of a very easy, straightforward and crowdfunding campaign. 20, 30, 40, all doable. It just takes a little bit of organisation, and we can help you with that. And I also just wanted to mention at this point that Spacehive is what we call an all or nothing crowdfunding model. So what that means is that you do need to, and I know I was saying earlier about kind of don't put your target amount any higher than it needs to be, because you do need to hit that target in order to release the funds. So say, for example, you said, oh, we'll need £100,000 for something, and you only raised £20,000, then if you didn't raise that in enough time, then that would get just refunded to anybody that pledged it because you didn't have enough money. So it's just something that's worth in mind. You do need to sort of be realistic about what you think you can achieve, and that's what we're here to do. We're here to sort of help you with those calculations. But what I would say at this stage is that the best thing to do is to have a look at the Spacehive website, and you'll see that is, again, these are just all some projects from Kent, but there's a broad range of things. But even, and again, I've got a few examples of more village hall-y type things as well, but look at other project pages, see what they've done, see how they've listed their costs out, see what things you like and you appeal to you, and use that to sort of like inform how you might run your campaign. We can also connect you. It's very easy to contact anybody that's run any of those kind of campaigns before, and people are usually really happy to help and want to talk about what they did and how they found the process. You'll see we've got things from the restoration of Louisa Bay flower beds to baby bank to an autism advisory service to a 400 meters running track. So there's a they just have a nose on the website, and that's the best way to kind of understand what you could do. Now I've just got a few more again, I'll just sort of flip through them just so you've got an example there, but what I'll do is I'll share links to all these afterwards so you can have a look in your own time if it's of interest to you. So we've gone, this is the an accessible all-weather 400 meter track, but that was done by the Lympney Playing Field and Village Hall. So it's a group that wasn't the Village Hall itself, but they managed to put that land to great use, which is very exciting. That project is going on. And then we've got, this one hasn't launched yet, but we've got people heating a Village Hall here, which is very, very relevant, like a perfect example there. And then we've got some, we've got community kitchens and Eastergate Hall. So again, you just see the idea. Some of these were they just needed £4,000 for some small additions. Then we've got, it was something, again, this is something more in London, so in Hackney, but it was turning in an old demolished building was being turned into a village hall. So they did amazingly there, raising over £46,000. Again, these are just examples of, again, going off the theme slightly of sustainability, but again, if a hall needs a new stage or anything like that, any kind of additions or things that will make the space more useful for the community, they're all eligible, and we love to see them. So those kind of things are great. And then we've got another one here, which is, just examples of lots of different village halls doing their thing. So again, I can share lots of those with you at a later date. So this is just a little reminder now, just to go back to, so as I was saying, like if you're thinking this might suit you, and if you want to know vaguely how quickly do you need to start getting organised and planning. So usually we would say you want to start thinking about what kind of budget do you need? Have you got the permissions for any work to take place? Thinking about what are those costs, and that can sometimes take a while, especially if you're trying to get quotes from suppliers or following the right kind of advice. So give yourself plenty of time to get organised first, so you're not rushing and if it gets to the deadline. The deadline date, that's the date that we just ask you to have created your project page and to have pitched the funds. So there's two separate parts there. You create your page, and that's like the shop front, the bit where you have the pictures and the lovely explanation, and then the pitch is usually a few additional questions which are more similar to usual grant funding, where you're speaking directly to the council. It's not public. These are parts where it's more talking about that impact and what you're trying to achieve. And then you get your page verified. So that's something additional that Spacehive does, is that because we're working with public funding, we're working with the community's money, and we're working with community benefit projects, it's really important that every project that goes live is can physically be delivered. We have to make sure that, for example, these things, make sure you've got insurances in place, you've got the permissions that you need, that the costs that you've said, we will double check those to a certain extent just to make sure they're realistic. But it's really important that every project that's live and crowdfunding is reputable and is organised, and they've got everything they've thought of. And again, so that's verification isn't a scary process at all. It's more of just us helping you along the way to be like, oh, have you thought of this? Or, oh, we've noticed that you've missed something, that, for example, some insurance or something like that. We don't want you to be left empty pocketed at any point. So that's that process. And then these are just example dates and times. Each project is slightly different, but the idea is usually you'd have around, say, a 3-month campaign. Your campaign starts, the project will then get assessed halfway through the campaign, which I'll just explain in a moment. Then hopefully you hit your target, and then you can spend the funds as you need to. And then I've got an example here of, so when your page is live, it's very easy for people to pledge to it. You'll see there's just a yellow button that says back this project. So people come along, click on back this project, and they can pay using their credit card, debit card, PayPal, Apple Pay, whatever. Yeah, we use Stripe as our payment processor, so if anybody's familiar with that. So it's all sort of done online. You can even do a bank transfer, direct debit, however somebody wants to pay. There's quite a lot of options there. And that's just a reminder of that your page is very much about making the project come to life. So you want lots of lovely colourful pictures of people using the space, even if it's for something like you're getting some solar panels or you want to get it insulated. You want the pictures to show why the community space is important. You don't necessarily need to have pictures of the solar panels themselves, although you might, if you could do something, it's important to maybe to include those, but think about what are people going to look and feel like this is actually really important for us. And then there's, again, the process will help you think of like a short summary and all those kind of bits of like, why is the project important? How much money do you need? And that's all just in one place, and people can look on their phones and their laptops. And you can also, if you want, you can print it out and make flyers and posters and do that way, as long as people know what the link is to physically donate. So what might your crowdfunding campaign look like? So when you launch your campaign, I'm sorry, I'm aware this is a very colourful colourful diagram, but when you launch your campaign, your idea initially is to get as many pledges as possible, and that's what all these little dots here of everybody's little faces are. It's like individual people, friends, family, colleagues, people that you know that will think, oh, this is a great idea, here, just have £2 just to show that you like it. It's like voting with a couple of pounds. It doesn't need to be lots and lots of money, and you might find you might get, say, 100 backers and they've only pledged £2 each. You might be like, oh, I'm not getting that close to my target, but what you're doing is you're demonstrating community support, and that's really important when the council are then looking at your project to be like, oh, what should we pledge to them? How popular is it? That's how you show popularity, is by all those small pledges at the start, and you usually have a month to 6 weeks to gather those. And again, if people can't afford to pay anything, that's absolutely fine. They can also just like your page. There are places where you can just leave a comment. There are ways that you can show that community interest, even for those that can't spare £2. It's keen that everybody can feel that they're involved and they're part of this kind of journey with you. So that's how you would start. And then, of course, you're also trying to, once you've got a few more pledges on, you might approach local businesses, anything where there's sort of larger pots of money, you get those loaded on as well. And it's just a poem where you're sort of collecting all this money. Think of it like a giant piggy bank trying to collect those funds. So when the county council then assesses the projects, they'll be looking to see, oh, how popular is this? And also they'll then be looking at that part of the pitch of how you answer those questions and what your project page is. And then they'll usually award the pledges. Hopefully it will fit around halfway through to 3/4 of the way through your campaign. And then that's the part that hopefully you've got that great news that you've got a lovely injection of cash from the council. And then you can sort of shout about that, perhaps get some local press coverage, or if there's a local newsletter or anything where you just want to say, great news, we've got support from the county council. Can you help us now to help us hit that final target? So that is a really lovely kind of celebration moment. But then it's all about not taking your foot off the gas as such, and perhaps going to some larger corporates. Perhaps there might be a local celebrity, anybody. It's just maybe, and if you've had any small grants that are coming through as well, any sort of money that's coming in, feeding that into your campaign so you can hit your targets. So hopefully that's just a very sort of a colourful way of showing you that's kind of the shape of a crowdfunding campaign. So I know this can sound like quite a lot of work, and it is really, it can be. You do need to be fully committed to it. It is very different to just filling out a form and just sort of waiting and seeing what the results are. You do need to have ideally a team of people that are interested in it. It's just about getting the word out there. And I've got a few examples. Again, this is just a starter, but things like, as I've said, you might want to think of local schools and colleges, any organisations that have mailing lists that might be happy to share the campaign for you. Again, there's more traditional routes like making posters and leaflets to leave in local shops and notice boards as well. As I was saying, you can still organise your usual community events, bucket shaking and things like that, because it can all feed in, but then make use of online resources such as Facebook groups. There's really great ways that you can search for people that might have shared interests on Facebook, post into groups there. And again, Facebook Spacehive are very happy to show you. We do some workshops and one-to-one sessions as well, well on how you might use the internet to reach more people, because we're aware that it's not everybody's cup of tea, and you might want a little bit of training in that. But we also recommend that you do try and find somebody that's willing to help you if you absolutely hate online things and social media. If you can perhaps find a volunteer or somebody, a friend, family member that's happy to help you, we do recommend that, because it does make it a lot easier. And of course, there are other things like friends of groups. Think of the location that you're in, and just it's about thinking about that network and that ripple effect of who you know and who you can reach out to. And you'll be surprised at how many people you can reach, and yeah, really make your case for this importance of getting the work done. And as I was saying, so we are aware that crowdfunding or any of this kind of online fundraising is completely alien and new to lots of people. And what we as Spacehive are, we sort of have live chat, we do workshops, phone calls if you prefer. We've got lots of sort of video how-to guides. Yeah, lots of things that we're here to educate you and to support you and help you to tap into these maybe different funds, like sources of funds. We also have a network of nearly 2,000 project creators, people that have been there and done that. And as we were saying before, we can always connect you with them, like record little tips and get people that can kind of really support you on that journey. So it's about not feeling like you're doing it alone and not just sort of sitting on a website and like interacting with a robot. It's about that journey of engaging the community. And again, this is just sort of bringing some of those faces to life, some examples of additional benefits to crowdfunding. So of course, I'm sure that the main interest here is going to be about access to funding. You want to sort of get that insulation, you want a heat pump, you want to try and make those changes to your village hall or whatever it is to help with that. But also that the process of crowdfunding in itself can be really good for engaging your community, making new connections with businesses or people with skills that you might have not done already before. Even if you are thinking like, oh, actually, I'd love to have a go at this. I've never done it, but we had Ursula there that kind of said she was terrified of this whole idea at the start. Again, this was she had a flower bank project and she wanted to start sort of like rescuing flowers, and it was a lovely social enterprise idea. And I remember her just saying after, she spent like a good 6 months of planning, preparing, she's like, I'm actually a social entrepreneur. She was getting publicity, the community were joining in and helping her. And it's just that kind of feeling of, it's not just about getting the funding, it's this journey that you go on and all these wonderful ways of connecting people in the community to achieve something bigger. And again, I won't read these all out to you, but it's about those, as we're saying, connections and raising profiles. So again, if you're a small community group that run your village hall, and you actually want to find ways to tap into funding, that's not as easy as usual. It's usually all these larger organizations that have the fundraising teams and they can get that. It's about opening different pots of funding up to you. So that's just one of the things that we think it's worth the effort and it's worth a go. So if you are thinking of that crowdfunding might be of interest to you or somebody you know, then just a few sort of notes on sort of the next steps. The main thing is just that step 1 there, which I will make sure that it's a clickable link when we share it, but I'll send you a direct link too, is about just fill out a project idea form. And what that is, it's just a very simple, who are you, where are you, what do you want to do? And then that will come through into my inbox, and then I can start helping you thinking about it and decide if it's the right path for you. So that's the main thing. And then you just see if that was the case, and you go through, you start to create your project page, you pitch to the funds, and that's the whole process. So that's just my details there. Again, I'll make sure that you can contact me very easily. We do have, there's sort of a Twitter hashtag, and there's lots of, there's sort of the Kent and at Spacehive. So if you are active on Twitter or if your village hall does lots of things, please do, even just to say like, oh, really interesting to hear about this opportunity. We're really keen to get the word out there about this funding opportunity. It's still quite new, still quite fresh, and we just want as many people to know that it is an option if they're interested in it. So that's that, and then it's just basically thank you so much. We've got about 10 minutes until 1 o'clock, so again, any questions, clarifications, feel free to fire them away. Otherwise, I'll let you all go and grab a cup of tea and have a break, but thank you so much, and I hope that was interesting for you.
Thank you so much, Kathryn. That was absolutely brilliant. A whistle-top tour, but
yeah, sorry, I was probably speaking very quickly.
But it did give us a really good, sense of what it's all about. And as you said, we can share the slides so people can sort of go through it little bit more slowly if they want to, just check on some of the details. And I mean, I think it's fabulous. I really like that aspect of it, that you are that bringing people together and you know, creating connections and raising your profile, so it can be a real community effort, can't it? And well, it has to be, actually.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
that's a lovely aspect of it. So I know we've had sort of quite a long morning, but if there are any particular questions that anyone would like to ask, Sally and Andrew, we've got here. No. You've obviously answered everything.
No, well, yeah, definitely there's lots of information available on those slides and things, so I think that will hopefully answer questions. But no, it's just really lovely to be invited along, and I think it's such a important session to come along to, so I hope the rest of the day is really great for you all. And stay in touch.
I think Andrew's saying he's having some audio issues,
no.
so he might have missed some of it, but that's okay. We'll
I hope that wasn't from my end. Hopefully it was clear.
It sounds like it's his end, so we can we can send around the recording and anyway with the slides, and it'll go out anyway to all our village halls and parish councils as well. We've got parish council lists, so although, as you say, it's not directly open to parish councils, they can partner with village halls or other community organisations, so it will go out far and wide, and it's certainly good to have it as a as another option, because as you know, it's not easy to raise funds, so having it there is a really good option. So thank you very much. And Andrew Hill, hang on, Andrew, can you see that?
Yes, puts in a maximum of, correct. Are you able to give an indicator? So the average award, again, so it does depend, it depends on your target amount. So what we would say is, it is, so trying to think, the projects that are very clearly sort of meet one of those criteria and say they have a minimum of 30 backers or so at the point in which they're being assessed, they'll try and give the maximum amount, basically. What we would find, and we usually have a really lovely, it just sort of naturally happens that you'll have a few smaller projects where people only need a couple of £1,000, so their maximum pledge would only be, say, £1,000 or £2,000. But then in each round there are some of those larger ones that are vying for those full £20,000. But I'm trying to think, in the last round we had around, I think, 17 or 18 projects in total. So if you think of that, there's plenty of funds to go round. So if you are looking to get that full 20k, say you've got a 40k project and you wanted that full 20k, and you could sort of show the links, I would say the likelihood of you getting that 20k would be quite high, but say imagine you needed 20k as the max, I would say imagine you might get 15 of that 20k to give you sort of to be on the safe side, to say you wouldn't get anything less than, I would say, like 25%. That helps, but again, it is a little bit of a how long is a piece of string, because it's still very it depends on the projects and the areas and what they're deciding. But I wouldn't, if you were calculating it, don't think I'm absolutely going to get 50% of my target. Imagine, say it might be 40%, 35%, and then everything else should be a happy bonus.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, that's helpful.
Oh, thank you, Andrew. So I just need to open. I can only see the start of your
Can you see what that's
saying? Yeah, lovely. It was fine. It was just being nice.
Great,
thank you, Andrew.
Great. Okay, so thank you so much, and really, really interesting, very useful for me as well as the village audit advisor to know more about that, and that's that as an option. So brilliant.
Yeah, definitely. And please do feel free to, very happy for my email address to go far and wide to anybody that, even if it feels like it's not relevant, I'm very much, my job as a partnership manager is to talk to people and to help signpost and support. So please feel free to get anybody to contact me. I'm always happy to have a chat.
Okay, fantastic, lovely. Okay, thank you so very much. So I think we'll just wind this up now, and that's our day 4 of Village Halls Week done from this point of view. Anyway, the presentations, and then we've got another day tomorrow, the last day of Village Halls Week. So thank you so much, Kathryn. Yeah, I'm sure we'll be in touch again. Thanks. Bye.